We don't always know why certain stories stay with us. This one did because it didn't begin with anger or shouting. It began with control, with a room that had already decided who mattered and who didn't. Margaret Maggie Caldwell had spent most of her adult life keeping a family company upright without ever standing in front of it. What happened the morning her brother became CEO wasn't loud, but it was final. This is how she remembers it. I was already seated when Andrew walked into the boardroom. He didn't look at me at first. He went straight to the head of the table, pulled the chair back, and sat down like it had always been his. The room smelled like coffee and polished wood. The same room where I'd presented operational reports for years. The same faces around the table. No one met my eyes. Andrew cleared his throat. "We're going to keep this moving," he said. "There are a few structural changes we need to make." He glanced at a sheet of paper, then finally at me. "Your services are no longer needed." That was it. No explanation. No thanks. No preamble. I waited a second, not because I was shocked, because I wanted to be sure I'd heard him correctly. Effective when immediately, someone shifted in their seat. Someone else looked down at their notes. No one spoke. "You can clear your office today," Andrew added. "We'll have security disable access by end of business." I nodded once. I could feel my pulse in my neck, steady and loud. Understood. As I stood, Andrew was already moving on. Next item, marketing realignment. We've seen moments like this before. Not dramatic, just quiet enough to make resistance feel pointless. I walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. The hallway felt longer than usual. My assistant looked up as I passed, eyes wide, but I kept going. At the elevator, my phone buzzed. A client's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Not yet. By the time the doors closed, I knew one thing clearly. He thought the title made him powerful. If you've ever walked away without explaining yourself, you know the silence doesn't last. If this story feels familiar, you already understand why some endings don't start until later. I didn't go back to my office right away. I stood in the hallway for a moment, hand on the wall, feeling the cool paint under my palm. It grounded me. I needed that. Megan caught up to me near the copy room. "Maggie? What just happened?" Her voice was low, careful, like the walls might be listening. "I'm done," I told her. Effective immediately. She shook her head once. "That doesn't make sense. You just closed the Savannah renewal last quarter." "I know." She followed me into my office anyway. The lights were still on. My notebook sat open on the desk, the one I used for client calls. I closed it and slid it into my bag. "He can't run operations," Megan said. Not angry, worried. "He won't," I answered. "Not the way it's actually done." That was the thing no one ever said out loud. Andrew handled stages and meetings and headlines. I handled calls at 6 in the morning, missed shipments, vendors on the edge of walking. I was the one people trusted when something went wrong. Megan leaned against the doorframe. "Your dad knows this. He knows results." I replied. "He just never cared how they happened." There was a long pause. The kind where you both realize the rules haven't changed, just the names on the doors. We've noticed how often these moments happen without witnesses, how quietly work disappears when it isn't flashy. I packed slowly. Awards last, photos last. I left the chair exactly where it was. When I finally picked up my bag, Megan spoke again. "If you need anything," I stopped her with a look. Not because I didn't appreciate it, because saying more would have made it harder to walk out. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed again. A different client this time. I still didn't answer. I didn't drive home after leaving the building. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot instead and sat there with the engine running. My hands were steady. That surprised me. 7 years earlier, I'd sat across from Grace in a smaller office with worse chairs. She slid a folder toward me and asked, "Are you protecting the company, or are you protecting yourself?" "Both." I'd answered. Not defensive, just honest. That was when Caldwell's strategic advisory took shape. Not as a rebellion, as a buffer. Something quiet, something legal. My father had skimmed the paperwork at the dining table, glasses low on his nose. As long as it keeps clients calm, he'd said. Do what you need. Andrew had been there too, scrolling on his phone. Sounds boring, he'd muttered. Let legal handle it. They signed. Everyone did? Back in the car. My phone buzzed again. I answered this time. Maggie. Daniel from Atlanta said. We just got an email. Says Andrew's your replacement. I exhaled. That's correct. A pause. Papers rustling. That changes things. We need to talk about renewals. We've heard that tone before. The one where certainty slips. Not all at once, but enough to notice. I'm available. I told him. You know where to reach me. When the call ended, I turned off the engine. The silence felt different now. Not empty, just waiting. The next morning, I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made coffee the slow way. Grounds everywhere. I didn't clean them up. I needed my hands busy. When the phone rang, I flipped it over and answered without looking at the name. Maggie, a familiar voice said. It's Linda. Raleigh account. I leaned against the counter. Good morning. She didn't return it. Papers shifted on her end. We got the notice about leadership changes. Andrew sent a note. He asked us to move the renewal call forward. I waited. Another pause. Then, quieter. We're not ready to do that without you. My stomach tightened. Not relief. Pressure. That makes sense. I replied. The advisory agreement hasn't changed. I know, Linda said. That's the issue. We went through timelines, terms, what could and couldn't move forward. No raised voices, just careful words, like we were walking on glass. By the time we hung up, my coffee was cold. A second call came in before I could pour it out. Then a third. Different cities, same hesitation, same careful tone. Around noon, Andrew's name finally lit up my screen. I let it ring once, twice. When I answered, his voice came tight and fast. Why are clients saying they can't renew without you? I closed my eyes. Because they can't. That's not how this works. It is. I said, evenly. It's how it's always worked. There was a sharp breath on the other end. Silence stretched. We've noticed that first moments of panic rarely sound dramatic. They sound confused. Andrew spoke again. Slower now. We need to talk. We will. I answered. When you've read the agreements. The call ended. I stood there a moment longer, then finally poured the coffee out and started over. I signed the lease on a small office the following week. Second floor. No sign yet. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. It wasn't impressive, but it was quiet. Megan showed up with 2 banker's boxes and an extension cord. I figured you'd need power before optimism, she said, setting them down. Lucas arrived later, jacket still on, eyes scanning the room. So this is it, he said, not doubtful, just taking it in. For now, I answered. The first few days blurred together. Calls in the morning, spreadsheets at night. We shared one printer and argued over who'd refill the paper. I kept a legal pad by my chair and crossed things out more than I wrote. Mid-week, a client from Savannah pulled back. Not angry. Careful. We like you. Maggie, the voice said. But we need stability. After the call, I stared at the wall longer than I meant to. Megan didn't rush in. She just slid a cup of water across the desk and waited. We've seen how quiet rooms hold pressure better than crowded ones. I might have misjudged how fast this could move, I said finally. Lucas leaned against the window. We didn't follow you because it was easy. That helped. Not enough to erase the doubt, but enough to keep going. By Friday, my voice was hoarse. My inbox was full. Some days felt like progress. Others felt like survival dressed up as planning. Late that night, alone in the office. I locked the door and sat for a minute before turning off the lights. No applause, no certainty. Just work still waiting in the morning. The board meeting invite came through late Tuesday afternoon. Andrew hadn't called. He'd sent it like a calendar correction. I didn't attend, Grace did. She called me afterward while I was eating a sandwich at my desk. One hand still on the mouse. It didn't go the way he expected. She said, I didn't ask her to explain. I waited. They asked him to walk through the renewal pipeline. Not slides, not vision. Actual steps. I pictured Andrew at the long table, jacket buttoned, voice practiced, and a breath on the line. He talked around it, used phrases, didn't answer timelines. I stopped chewing. One of the directors asked who handled the Raleigh and Savannah transitions last year. He said you did. Then someone else asked why no one could reach you. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the air unit loud in the pause. There was a moment. Grace continued, slower now, when no one spoke. He kept adjusting his pen. We've noticed how silence changes shape when authority slips. It doesn't explode. It thins. There was also a question about his credentials. She added, not an accusation, just clarification. My chest tightened. Not satisfaction. Something closer to relief mixed with sadness. After we hung up, Andrew called. His voice sounded different. Not sharp, controlled in a way that took effort. You didn't have to make this harder. I stood and walked to the window. I didn't make it anything. I replied. I stepped away. That's not how they see it. I watched cars move through the lot below. Ordinary. Unaware. Then they're finally seeing the right parts. I said. He didn't respond. The line went dead. I sat back down and finished my sandwich. Slower this time, and went back to work. My father asked to meet for lunch the following week. Not at the office. Not at home. A quiet restaurant he liked, the kind with heavy menus and low lighting. He was already seated when I arrived. He stood halfway, then sat back down, like he wasn't sure which version of himself was expected. You look tired, he said. So do you. That landed between us. He folded his napkin carefully before speaking again. I didn't expect things to move this fast. I stirred my water. Neither did I. He leaned forward. The board is unsettled. Clients are unsettled. Andrew is struggling. I waited. The clink of silverware from another table filled the gap. We need stability, he continued. I want you back. Not relief, not triumph. Just a dull ache behind my ribs. As operations, he added, Andrew stays where he is. Publicly. I looked at him then. Really looked. The lines around his mouth were deeper than I remembered. That was my job before, I said. In everything but name. This time would be different. He insisted. I'd make sure of it. We've noticed how promises sound softer when they arrive late. I shook my head once. Slow. Calm. I already outgrew that role. His hand tightened around his glass. You'd let the company fracture. I'm not fracturing anything, I replied. I stepped out of the way. It was already breaking. He didn't answer. He stared down at the tablecloth like it might give him another option. When lunch ended, we stood without hugging. Outside. The air felt lighter. I walked back to my car alone and drove back to the office I'd chosen for myself. By the time summer settled in, the office sounded different. Phones ringing without urgency, laughter from the back room. Someone arguing with the printer like it was a person who could be reasoned with. Lucas leaned into my doorway one afternoon. Atlanta just confirmed the extension. Send them the revised timeline. I replied, and thanked them for their patience. He smiled and disappeared down the hall. We weren't big, we weren't flashy, but we were steady. Advisory work in the low 8 figures annually, enough to pay people on time, enough to plan instead of scramble. One evening, Megan handed me a folder before heading out. Payroll set. Also, Raleigh sent cookies again. I laughed, short and surprised. Tell them thank you. and that it's unnecessary. She hesitated. Your brother called earlier. I nodded once. Did you answer no? We've noticed how names lose their weight when the room has already moved on. Later that night, I stayed late to finish a call. When it ended, I shut down my computer and sat there a moment longer than usual. No adrenaline, no dread, just quiet. Outside, the sign by the door still looked temporary. I liked that. It reminded me this wasn't about arriving. It was about holding. I locked up, stepped into the warm air, and drove home without checking my phone. I still drive past the old building sometimes, not on purpose. It's just on the way to other places now. I don't slow down. Last week, Andrew left a voicemail. Nothing urgent. He said my name twice, like that might change something. I listened once, then deleted it, not out of anger, out of clarity. At the office, the lights go off around 6 most nights. People leave without apologizing for it. I like that. It means they trust tomorrow to be there. One evening, after everyone else was gone, I locked up and stood by the door a moment. The sign outside was still plain. My name, spelled correctly. No title underneath it. That felt right. For a long time, I thought being needed was the same as being valued. I stayed late. I fixed things quietly. I waited to be seen. What changed wasn't the company or the numbers. It was the moment I stopped measuring myself against a room that had already decided who I was supposed to be. Margaret Caldwell doesn't work there anymore. She doesn't carry that weight. Now, when I leave for the night, I take my keys, turn off the lights, and go home to a life that fits. If any part of this felt familiar, you already know why it matters. I start the engine. The street is quiet. And for the first time in years, so am I.